Thank you and good morning. So Sintercast has become a fairly regular participant at these events, so I think that most people know who we are. But let me start with a short reminder of who we are and what we do. Then 2 weeks ago, we published our full year results for 2024. So we can look at the full year results and the current status. And then I'd like to focus the rest of the presentation on the market and how we see the market developing going forward. So Sintercast has developed a process control technology to enable the reliable production of a new type of iron called compacted graphite iron, or CGI. CGI is stronger and stiffer than the normal iron, and the main application is for engines. So because of the higher strength and stiffness, we can increase the pressure in engines, and that provides more power, more horsepower, and more torque, but it also allows for a more complete combustion of the fuel. So we have cleaner and more fuel-efficient engines. So in comparison to previous generations, engines made with CGI are smaller and lighter, but give the same performance, and they're also cleaner and more fuel-efficient. The main application for our engines is in large vehicles, and we'll look at that in the next slide. And these are the vehicles that consume a lot of fuel, so we can make a really significant contribution to CO2 savings. We are not a manufacturer. We are a technology company. We provide the process control technology, so think of us more as a software and service provider. We have a royalty-type business model. More than 90% of our revenue is recurring. 2/3 of that recurring revenue comes from the production fee, effectively a royalty, and 1/3 of it comes from the sale of our bespoke sampling consumable, and you can see a picture of it there in the slide. Currently, we're supplying about 200,000 of those sampling consumables every year, so it's really grown up to a high-volume series production. This is our production breakdown from 2024. Commercial vehicles are our largest sector with 51%. They're also our highest growth opportunity going forward. In North America, we also supply engine technology for the Super Duty pickup class. Also for the full-size pickup, you see there in the top right corner, the Ford F-150. It's the most popular vehicle in America. And our technology is used for the base engine for that product line. We also have 4% of our production for mid-size pickups. We do the Ford Ranger, the Volkswagen Amarok, also some other SUVs, and 5% in the off-road sector. So think marine, agriculture, rail, and particularly now with the growth of data centers, stationary power generation. Yeah. We don't do cars. We have no exposure to cars. Cars last year were less than 1% of our volume. So looking back at our growth since 2008, you can see that it's a very stable growth. And growth is never a straight line. There are always ups and downs. The data points on these graphs are what we have published from each quarterly report over the last 17 years. And you can see that you can approximate the growth more or less by a straight line. And there are periods of down, for example, 2008-9, the economic crisis. In 2012-13, one of our high-volume programs came to its end of life. 2020, of course, this short, sharp shock from COVID. And you can see that at the end of last year, we also came into another down period. So one of our high-volume programs came to its end of life in September of 2024, and so the volume has come down. But as in the past, we'll recover from that. The pipeline looks really strong, and we'll return to growth. We always target double-digit growth. Over the last 10 years now, if you do the math, our compounded annual growth rate is 7.9%, and that's, of course, affected by the production in the last half of 2024. We were running at a production volume, as we count, of approximately 4 million engine equivalents, and you can see that we finished last year with a run rate of about 3.2 million. Our target remains to have double-digit growth through 2030. I'm confident that we'll hit that, recovering from where we are now, and as I say, with a very strong pipeline. Our goal is to reach the 5 million engine equivalent milestone during 2026, and to grow further to the 7 million engine equivalent milestone in 2029. And later in the presentation, I'll come back and build how we get from 3.2 million today to 5 million in 26 and to 7 million in 29. But you see with those growth ambitions that we get back to the double-digit figure. You can see here our growth in revenue. Our compounded annual revenue growth over the last 10 years is 9.5%. You see that at the end of last year, our production volume was down a little bit, but our revenue for full year was up. We also have revenue from new installations, and it was quite a strong year last year. Our normal average is about 8 million crowns in installation revenue. Last year, we finished with 11.4. And the installation pipeline is still quite strong, so we expect another strong year for installations in 2025. I like to do the math in terms of revenue per employee to normalize that. We're only 26 people, most of us sitting in Katrineholm. If you do that, 135 million revenue last year, 26 people, it's 5.2 million crowns of revenue per employee. And likewise 1.7 million crowns of profit per employee. We finished last year with a profit of 43 million. Our operating margin last year was 31.8%. With the strong growth outlook and with stable operating costs, we're confident that we get the operating margin above 40% by 2028. You'll see some really strong steps in operating margin in 26 and 27. And then we come to dividend. What have we done with the money historically? We've given it back to the shareholders. So here you can see the growth in our dividend with the most recent proposal for an ordinary dividend of 6 crowns, an extraordinary dividend of 1 crown, with a current share price of about 107. It's a 6.5% dividend yield. Over the last 15 years, we've given 375 million crowns to our shareholders. And we now have 15 consecutive years with an increasing ordinary dividend. And the compounded annual growth rate on that is 20.7. So we've been quite aggressive with the dividend. We're at 15 years. Our goal is to make 25 consecutive years. Again, the pipeline looks quite strong between now and 2030. The cost will remain stable or perhaps reduce a little bit. So I'm confident that we get from 15 to 20 years. And then it's fascinating to see how we go beyond 2030. I mentioned earlier that our engines are smaller and lighter and more fuel efficient, and therefore we save CO2. We have just over 1 million vehicles per year that we support for production. I think that the number of Sintercast vehicles on the road today is about 13 million. So all of those 13 million vehicles save fuel and contribute to our total CO2 save. So currently, we contribute to the saving of about 10 million tons of CO2 per year. And cumulatively, since we started our production in 1999, it's about 69 million tons. Our published target that we published back in 2023 is to reach 100 million tons of CO2 saving by 2028, and we're on pace to do that. I'm sure that we'll do that in the second half of 2027. Put it in perspective, we're saving or contributing to the saving of about 10 million tons of CO2 per year. The entire Swedish domestic transportation sector emits about 14 million tons per year. So it's a really significant saving. And it makes sense. In Sweden, there are about 300,000 new vehicles every year, and Sintercast participates in the production of about 1.5 million new vehicles every year. So it's a really strong compounding, particularly because we focus on large vehicles. Right, so let's look out and see how the market will develop. The thing that has helped us through all of the years is increasingly stringent emissions legislation. And here in Europe, it started with Euro 4 back in 2003, 2004. Today we're on Euro 6. Euro 7 is coming in 2029. And basically, with each new emissions legislations, engines have to become cleaner. And one by one, OEMs have changed from conventional cast iron to CGI to help them meet the new emissions legislation. So just looking at how that rolled, back in 2003, the pressure inside of engines was something like 210 bar. Today, engines are operating at about 250, and here I speak about heavy-duty commercial vehicles. Yeah, and we think that out in 28, 29, it will be something like 270 bar. So DAF was the first commercial vehicle manufacturer to choose CGI. Again, that was in 2004. In 2005, DAF made a second vehicle, MAN in Germany, Navistar International in the US, and Hyundai in Korea, all Sintercast customers. With Euro 6, Scania came on stream. We do the 13-liter engine for Scania, and also the big 16-liter V8, the king of the road engine. Daimler came on stream. Hyundai made additional CGI engines. We now have 6 CGI engines with Hyundai. And I must say, Ford is our largest customer. We do 7 engines with Ford, but here I'm speaking about heavy-duty trucks, and Ford is all pickup trucks and passenger vehicles. Most recently, Traton has developed a new 13-liter engine using Sintercast CGI. We support all of their production here in the Scania foundry in Sweden, and also in a foundry in Mexico and another foundry in Brazil. First Automobile Works in China. And today, something like 40 to 50% of the commercial vehicle manufacturers have changed to CGI. For the next step, for Euro 7, Fiat Powertrain, FPT Industrial, has announced that they will use CGI in their next generation engine. And there are others as well that haven't made public their use of CGI. But we see that the growth will go from that 40 to 50% today to more than 80% in 2029. Here's the thing. What will batteries do between now and 2030? You know, they'll grow, but they won't be big, regardless of what has been said. And I think the realization has really started to set in over the last year or two. But maybe batteries for heavy-duty commercial vehicles will be something like 10% in 2030. CGI will grow from 40 to 50% to more than 80%. And that's something you never read about in the newspaper, but over the next 5 years, CGI will grow faster than batteries. And it is clear. I mentioned FPT in that previous overhead. Just in October of this year, they made the first publication about their new engine. Let's read it together because it really echoes the things that I've been saying about CGI. So they say, one common innovation FPT chose for the XC13, X is the new generation, regardless of fuel type, was to migrate from standard castings for the cylinder block and head to compacted graphite iron. This enables us to be lighter, but also more rigid. So that aids emissions and also the amount of cylinder pressure that we can maintain. The improvements FPT made reduced weight by about 10% on both the diesel and natural gas models compared to the previous generation, C13. And they continue. Compared to the C13, these and other improvements in the XC13 have resulted in a more than 2% increase in power and over 12% increase in torque in the diesel version, with a corresponding 7% decrease in fuel consumption. The natural gas model saw increases in power and torque of more than 9% and over 10% respectively, with a fuel efficiency improvement of about 8%. It's exactly the things that we saw in the overhead with the big arrow going from Euro 4 to Euro 7. Yeah? That's how OEMs are benefiting from CGI. So you may have seen that in January we published a press release that First Automobile Works in China has started production of a new engine. It's a 13-liter engine. 13-liter is the sweet spot for heavy-duty commercial vehicles. And also, just at the end of February, that MAN in Germany has started the production of a new engine. It's the Traton Group engine that we've been supplying to Scania and International in the US for the last 2 years. just that MAN is now coming on stream. So how do we get from 3.2 to 5? I mentioned earlier that we were at something like 4 million engine equivalents through the first half of last year. So we will recover from that. We had the stoppage of one of our high volume programs that hit us for about 500,000. And the other 300,000 is that the market has been slow. And we've all heard about a slowdown in the market, particularly for European commercial vehicles over the last 6 to 8 months, really since we came out of the summer shutdown last year. So FAW and MAN together will increase about 1 million engine equivalents. That gets us from 3.2 to 4.2-ish. Market recovery, that hit us for about 300,000. The indications are that the market starts to improve in the second half of the year. That's another 300,000. That gets us up to around 4.5. And then there's new emissions legislation in the US in 2027. And what always happens is that there's a pre-buy before new emissions legislations, and we'll get a boost from that. So that gets us well up into the 4.7, 4.8 million. And with our normal variation month to month, I believe that we will hit the 5 million engine equivalent milestone before the end of 2026. Looking further, there are other new programs. We mentioned FPT and the overhead with the big arrow, and we said others in quotes. So there's other programs that are in the pipeline that haven't yet been announced. And just a general growth in China. Today, China represents less than 1% of our production. We forecast that in 2029 it will represent 15% of our production. Yeah? So we're supposed to be at 7 million engine equivalents by the end of 2029. That means that China should contribute about 1 million. That's your 15%. There's a lot of discussion, you know, what will the future be? And again, I'm focusing on our biggest sector, commercial vehicles. Will it be batteries? Will it be hybrids? Fuel cells are discussed, and of course, engines. 2 years ago, I think everybody thought it would be battery. It would be battery easily, quickly, and cheaply. The reality is setting in that it will not be fast or easy. And the debate is starting to change. It's changing to engines with clean fuels. So diesel and natural gas, it's clear that we have to move away from these fossil fuels, and that will happen. But will it be renewable diesel, for example, HVO, biodiesel? Will it be renewable natural gas? We hear a lot now about synthetic fuels and e-fuels and converting power from windmills into liquid fuels. Or will it be hydrogen? About a year ago in the European Union, they were discussing that trucks have to reduce CO2 emissions by 90% by 2040. Yeah? And that was supposed to entirely be done with batteries, and there was a realization that that was unlikely. And Germany was the standout on this. Germany said, it's not going to happen. We have to make a provision for engines running with clean fuels. And indeed, there was an agreement that clean fuels would be allowed. It has not yet been voted into legislation. That's scheduled to be voted upon in 2027. And with the change in the European Parliament and the EU Commission, I'm confident that clean fuels will be allowed and that engines will be an important part of the mix going forward. And as we say in the industry, the debate will evolve from engines to energy. Engines are great, right? They have 100 years of development. We have the manufacturing infrastructure, we have the refueling infrastructure, and we have the service network around the world. If we can just feed them with clean fuels, it is the most efficient solution going forward. And we also see that the debate is starting to change. There's a lot of discussion about decarbonization, but the debate is evolving to defossilization. We have to get rid of the fossil fuels, but if we have clean fuels, we will achieve the net zero targets. And just one last slide to share some interesting thinking. So somehow we have to get from where we are today to net zero in 2050. In the blue line, this is the wait scenario. If we wait for batteries to come and for the infrastructure to batteries to come, we will travel on a path like the blue line. But if we bring in clean fuels, Yeah, we will travel along the green line because we can make the contribution already today. And if you put it in perspective, and everything inside of those two circles is the amount of save by using clean fuels. And in perspective, there are 1.5 billion vehicles on Earth today, and we make about 90 million every year. So you take those 90 million, make 10% of them batteries, make 20%, make 30% of them out of batteries. Doesn't help anything. The only way you solve the problem is to fix the 1.5 billion. We have to make available clean fuels for the legacy fleet. And if the clean fuels are available for the legacy fleet, you can also use them for engines going forward. And that's how I think that the development will go. And that's how Europe is now transitioning and leaning. So we talk about Europe and just finishing with the United States. So this is the Department of Energy and the EPA. This is under the Biden administration, right? This was published about 1.5 years ago. And they try to look at what will be the mix for the United States to reach net zero in 2050. And you can see that it will be a mix. There will be battery electric, particularly for smaller vehicles. And as you move toward larger vehicles with a more severe duty cycle, it will be hydrogen. Maybe the hydrogen is used for fuel cells. It's also used for combustion engines and what we call sustainable or net zero liquid fuels. And all of that is the opportunity for Sintercast. The future solution will be a mix. It always is. Today we're making something like 1.5, or our technology is being used for the production of something like 1.5 million vehicles per year. I can't imagine in any way that it will be less than 1.5 million in the 2030s. We have a really bright growth outlook. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Yes, sir.
Fantastic development for your company.
Thank you.
And you have been the CEO for many years, right?
I have been the CEO since 2002.
Yeah,
and
for a long
technical
time.
director since 1991.
Yeah, probably the longest CEO, I think, on the stock exchange. But anyhow, we can start off with one question regarding the improved future profitability.
Yeah.
Is that what drives that? Is that economy of scale, or is it a mix in the product, or could you evaluate a little bit what we should expect?
I think it's three things. It's on the revenue side, simply growth from where we are today, 3.2 million engine equivalents today to 5 million target 2026, 7 million target 2029. So the revenue side increases. It will be price increase as well. We have long-term agreements. It's normal in our automotive industry, but we have price reviews coming at the end of 25 and at the end of 26 with our larger customers. I think we get a contribution from that as well. And simply reduced cost. So today, I have announced my retirement. I will step down in May of 2026, so another 14 months or so to go. My successor is already in the company. That's a double cost. Also, one of our senior technical people will step down at the end of this year. His replacement is already in-house. So 2 people will go out. There will be a reduction in headcount, a reduction in cost. Yeah. And so I see revenue going up, cost going down, and therefore the operating result increasing from where we are today, high 31% toward 40%.
Okay. Steve, one more question. I mean, you are on a global market, right, from Sweden, and there is a lot of discussions regarding the tariffs and especially in the US, and how sensitive is Sintercast for those kind of initiatives?
So I start with a disclaimer. I'm a Canadian.
Yeah.
You can tell by the mustache. Yeah, so that's changing, of course. I don't see it affecting Sintercast. Europe and America grew up differently. In Europe, there were independent foundries. In America, it grew up that every OEM had his own foundry. Okay. And in the last 20 years, the OEMs have all said that's non-core business, we close our foundries. Today, there are no foundries in the United States producing cylinder block and head. So what's to tariff, right? There's no production in the US. They get it all from Mexico, Brazil, and a little bit from Europe, and that can't change. And so nobody can say, oh, we'll stop using the Sintercast foundry in Brazil and start using the foundry in America. It won't happen, and nobody will start a foundry before the end of the Trump administration, because it takes more than 3.5 years to build a new foundry. So that won't change. The only thing that can hurt us is that the economy suffers, truck sales suffer, and so there are less to sell. But the tariffs can't hurt us.
Okay. Thank you very much. Time goes by very fast, so we don't have any more questions. Thank you very much.